Today I want to talk about David and Goliath. So I saw this tweet and it made me think about a podcast I heard by Malcolm Gladwell a few years ago. And I wanted to make this video originally just to be kind of like, but actually, and then I fell down a rabbit hole and the but actually got so much more involved than I expected. I'm so excited. Let's get into it. So this tweet says, I can't stop thinking about the fact that Gaza doesn't have a military. There's no Palestinian military. In contrast, Israel has one of the most advanced, well-funded militaries in the entire world. Christians claim to care about the Bible, whole time they're rooting for Goliath. There are so many ironies here that my brain is kind of exploding. First of all, Goliath was Palestinian. A powerful Palestinian warrior defeated by the prophet David. David, who was a shepherd at the time, but through defeating Goliath, went on to become one of the kings of Israel. But the original reason I was gonna but actually this tweet is because the whole story of David versus Goliath is supposed to be the underdog David against the big undefeated warrior Goliath. But contemporarily, we understand that that probably isn't actually the truth of the story. Contemporary academics and scientists believe it is highly possible that Goliath had a hereditary pituitary disorder called acromegaly, also known as gigantism. Goliath in the story is described as slow-moving and ponderous. He was very large and foreboding, which is likely why people didn't want to go up against him, but that was likely caused by this pituitary disorder. He was unable to move fast because of the arthropathy and myopathy he could have been suffering from. Additionally, it's believed that he suffered a visual defect from pituitary adenoma. Acromegaly is a hormonal disorder that develops when your pituitary gland produces too much growth hormone. Your bones continue to increase in size. This can lead to fatigue and joint or muscle weakness, pain and limited joint mobility. It can result in vision problems. It's often associated with some type of arthritis or carpal tunnel. In the story in the Bible, Goliath says, "Am I a dog that you were coming after me with sticks?" Even though David was a shepherd, and if he was carrying a stick, he was likely only carrying one, his shepherd's staff. It's theorized that he had pituitary macroadenoma, which is large tumors that press onto parts of the brain, resulting in bitemporal hemianopsia, which is an ocular defect that leads to impaired peripheral vision in the outer temporal halves of the visual field of each eye. So even though he was very large and described as a mighty warrior, he was at several disadvantages. He was likely visually impaired and openly described as having motor impairments. And then you have David, who is described as an underdog because he was a young shepherd, not a warrior. But shepherds at the time used slings regularly to fend off predators from their flocks. David was so confident that he refused armor because he knew armor would impede his movement. It's likely that Goliath was wearing armor that further impeded his own movement. I've seen multiple articles and studies like this that analyze David's strategy of using the sling and come to the conclusion that he was actually at an advantage, with estimates that he could throw a rock with his sling 100 to 150 miles per hour. And he was obviously accurate with it because it said that he hit Goliath directly in the forehead, killing him instantly. Beyond that, a sling wouldn't have been expected in warfare, in a skirmish like they were participating in. The sling is a small weapon that can be hidden in the fist before being used, and thus David could surprise Goliath with his first shot. And the aim of the sling can only be known to the person holding the sling itself. So he had the element of surprise. The conditions of battle allowed David to aim his first shot quickly, quietly, and accurately to hit Goliath's weak point, his undefended forehead. David had experience fighting bears and lions in this manner. These researchers posit that Goliath wasn't wearing a helmet because he expected normal battle with swords at arm's length. They discuss how the skin covering the skull is thin and there's no stopping power there, thus the whole kinetic energy of a projectile has to be absorbed by the forehead skull bone. The Bible describes the stone as getting stuck in Goliath's forehead or sinking into Goliath's forehead, which means he was either knocked unconscious or killed instantly with the first hit. Malcolm Gladwell quotes an Israeli Defense Force ballistics expert who says that a typical sized stone hurled by an expert slinger at a distance of 35 meters would have hit Goliath's head with a velocity of 34 meters per second, more than enough to penetrate his skull and render him unconscious or dead. In terms of stopping power, that is the equivalent to a fair sized modern handgun. I recommend reading this article actually. It has an excerpt from the book that basically gives you the whole story. After David killed Goliath, he later went on to become king of Israel, ruling between 1090 and 970 BCE. The ironies here are insane to me. A future king of Israel, cast as an underdog, but actually a very skilled marksman, with sound battle strategy and the element of surprise, killing a theoretically intimidating warrior who is unsuspecting and disabled and Palestinian. So this person talking about the story of David and Goliath and still casting David as the underdog, the traditional interpretation of the story. David, who went on to rule Israel, killing Goliath, a disabled Palestinian warrior. Israel, whose main strategy is often to come with brute force, to come with inhumane tactics, but cast themselves as a victim, playing in self-defense, to cast themselves as an underdog while they're battling a people that don't have a standing army. The irony that Palestinians' only weapon to fight back is often just stones. The real lesson of David and Goliath is that the underdog isn't always the underdog. They're often capable of unsuspecting victories because they're cast as weaker, and they often get more support because they're cast as weaker, they're cast as having less of a chance. And Israel likes to think of themselves as the underdog. The world treats them as such, casting Palestinians as horrible terrorists who deserve all of the inhumane treatment they've been facing. But those of us who are on the right side of history know that Palestine is the underdog, but they're also, therefore, more likely to succeed. Instead of coming with brute force, like Goliath was perceived to do, they're coming with what they have available to them. Skills in communication, faith in the knowledge that they are on the right side of history, that they have the right to the land, that Israel is a brutal bully, an imperialistic machine that is trying to steal what isn't theirs. They have the power of truth, that oppressors have to oppress because they are afraid of those they oppress. If you have to steal to have power, you never had power to begin with. If you have to cast your opponents as animals, as mongrels, you never had humanity yourself. You're only projecting your own inhumanity onto your opponents to justify what you know deep down is wrong. If you have to lie about being an underdog, you're never going to win, no matter what. Because eventually, as with the story of David and Goliath, the truth always comes out. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.